Constitutional reform has been widely discussed and mapped out during the general election campaign. One of the areas in the GSLP's Liberals' successive manifestos is representation in Westminster. This would come with caveats, with Gibraltar having to protect its national authority.
So long as our constitutional autonomy is not in any way negatively affected, we would think that having representation in Westminster, which doesn't necessarily mean in the House of Commons, potentially in the House of Lords, would be a good thing, but not one that would enjoy our support if it meant the opposite. In other words, if it meant losing constitutional power in Gibraltar. I think there's a balance to be struck here. Look, we are British. Our passports say we are British, and yet we have no representation in the British Parliament.
So how does the government envisage this would work?
There are many different models that you can apply, so many actually that it makes very little sense to envisage this at the moment. It makes more sense to just contribute to the work being done by the Constitutional Committee in the UK and set out the parameters of what Gibraltar A would like and B what we would not be prepared to do in exchange for it. That is to say, no loss of constitutional power, but yes to the question of whether or not the people of the overseas territories should also have representation in Westminster. Now let's see what that consultation results in, and let's see whether there is any opportunity for a proposal to be made which we can consider and which we can propose as a good thing for the people of Gibraltar.
The Chief Minister believes this option is more possible now that the number of territories the UK is responsible for is reduced to the overseas territories.
But you've got to respect the diversity of the territories. Gibraltar is very different to a Caribbean territory and very different to Pitcairn or St. Helena. They're very different to us, so they would want to be able to be represented and make their points in a different way. Gibraltar is in Europe, and so there are European issues which are relevant to us, which might be as relevant to the UK, but not so relevant to those territories that are further flung. Do we have the same level of autonomy as the other overseas territories? No, we don't. So some of the other overseas territories have more decisions being made for them in the United Kingdom than we do. Do we jealously guard the autonomy that we have? Answer yes. Would we give any of that up for representation in Westminster? Answer no. Some of the others might. So there's a very difficult exercise to be done here. It's extraordinarily complex. And what we are answering is the question of principle at this stage about whether or not we should have that representation. I would say to you that just being asked in the way that we have been asked means that it is more likely now than before, although that doesn't mean that it is likely at all.
Another submission from the government is a removal of the UK's reserve power.
Consistently, governments of Gibraltar from the time of the GSLP at least, but perhaps I think even from the times of the AACR, have made the point that the reserve power is an overhang of times of colonialism. And the United Kingdom has made the opposite point, that whilst a territory remains British, the United Kingdom has to be able to ensure at least compliance with the United Kingdom's international obligations by that territory. And so there is this power which is not in any way limited just for the United Kingdom to ensure compliance with its international legal obligations, but is a power at large to make laws for Gibraltar in the United Kingdom for the peace, order and good government, which would amount in effect to a suspension of the legislative power of the government of Gibraltar and the Parliament in Gibraltar, and that would become in effect direct rule from London. Direct rule from London could be on all issues, or it could be on just one issue. It could be an international issue, it could be a national issue. And what is clear is that there is a sound argument that whilst that power to legislate in effect directly from London is in the Constitution, then the Constitution can, in some instances, be properly described, therefore, as a colonial constitution, because you could have the imposition of a rule on people in Gibraltar which they did not like.
An example of this is the abortion referendum, where the UK could have imposed a change in legislation. Although constitutional reform is usually synonymous with increased self-government, in this case we're looking at moves away from colonialism or perceptions of it. It's seen by the government as a step towards international decolonisation.
This would be one of the key steps towards what you call international decolonisation, which I would call decolonisation in the context of delisting by the C24 that would then have even less arguments. I think they have very few arguments left, but have even less arguments left to suggest that there is any aspect of the relationship between Gibraltar and the United Kingdom which de facto is colonial, but which de jure would also therefore have moved in the right direction of now showing complete decolonisation.
And the Chief Minister sees solutions in compromise, more supportive of reserve powers, restricted to issues of compliance with international obligations.